I have a brother. He is 7 years older than I am. And it was wonderful to have a brother that was 7 years older than me. You see, he was old enough that we didn't fight. He was old enough to put up with my immaturity, and he was also old enough to take an interest in who I was. And my brother, well, he was everything that I wanted to be. I idolized my brother. He was so important to me. And one of the things that I loved about my brother was the fact that he had taken such an interest in me. And not only had he taken an interest in me, but his friends had as well. I can't tell you how many times my mom would pull me aside and say, "Jeremy, you are so lucky to have a brother like you have. Jeremy, there aren't a lot of kids who have an older brother that would let him tag along the way that your brother lets you tag along. Jeremy, I hope you feel pretty lucky." And I did. Growing up, I was absolutely fanatical about sports, as were my friends as well. And we would go to high school basketball games while we were in grade school. And my brother's friends, well, they all played on the team. We would always sit in the front row of the stands. And I can't tell you how many times during an inbounds play or during free throw shooting where a player on the court would look at me and wink, or look at me and say, "Hey, Jeremy." And I would look down at my friends, and you could see just the envy in their eyes, that they knew who I was, and they cared about me. Many weekend nights, all my brother's friends would congregate at our house. They would come on a Friday evening, and everyone would hang out in our living room, and they would decide what they were going to do that evening. One particular night, there was about 6 or 7 people in our living room, and they were deciding that they were going to go to a movie that night. When one of my brother's friends looked at me and said, "Jeremy, you want to go with?" Immediately I looked at my mom looked at my brother, and he said, "Yes, it's okay." We had a meeting in the kitchen, my brother, my mom, and we went over the ground rules. My mom said, "Jeremy, listen to your brother. Jeremy, shut your mouth. You don't have to talk all the time. Jeremy, don't be annoying. Jeremy, you're pretty lucky to be going. Listen to your brother." I'll never forget, as we were driving to the movie theater that night, my brother was driving and his best friend, Mark Wallman, was in the passenger seat. I was in the back seat with 2 ladies, Terry on my left and Andrea on my right, and I was in heaven. As an aside, Terry happens to be my sister-in-law today, and we joke about that story quite a bit. I'll never forget the movie we went to that evening. Not because it was a good movie. It was actually kind of a bad movie. It was a Michael Keaton movie, One Good Cop, and it was one bad movie. But still to this day, that is one of the favorite movies that I have ever seen, because I was there with my brother and all of his friends. Mark Wallman, my brother's best friend, his family had a cabin next door to my family's cabin. Our families were best of friends. And it was so great because in the summers, my brother would bring 2 or 3 of his friends to the lake. Mark would bring another 2 or 3 friends to the lake. And every weekend I had all these high school guys that I could hang out with, that would pay attention to me, that I could tag along with. One particular night, all the kids were at my parents' cabin. All the adults were next door at the Wallman's cabin. When one of my brother's friends said to me, "Jeremy, I forgot my towel on Wallman's dock. Could you go down and get it for me?" I said, "No way." You see, it was way too late, and it was way too dark, and there was only one little light on the beach. And to risk my life and to go down in the middle of the dark was tempting too many forces that could be lurking out in the woods. But my brother's friend had a trump card. He had an ace up his sleeve. He said, "Jeremy, we'll time ya." Well, the line had been drawn. The challenge had been made. And there was no way that I could back down. I needed to go. My pride was at stake. And so I started to think to myself the path that I was going to take to get down from our cabin to the beach and over to the Wallman's dock where there was no light on, when I had a thought that crept in my mind. Halfway down our path, I could take a shortcut through the woods. There was a trail that went through the middle of the woods, and it was going to be dark, but it would shave a lot of time off, and I needed to impress those guys. So reluctantly, I made the decision that I would take the shortcut. I'll never forget when they said go. I'll never forget flying out of our door. I can still hear my breathing. I can still hear my footsteps pounding on the ground. I made it down our path. I hit the shortcut. I took that left. I went through that trail through the middle of the woods, outrunning any of the monsters that were out there. I made it to the dock. I picked up the towel. I turned around. I headed back into the woods when somebody cut the lights. And I was terrified. Immediately, the darkness surrounded me. Immediately, the darkness enveloped me and started closing in. It was so dark, it was as if somebody had thrown a blanket over my head. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. And at 10 years old, in the middle of the woods, in the pitch black, I was terrified. I was certain that I wasn't going to make it. And I began to panic. And I began to become disoriented. And the only thing that I could do at that time was to stand paralyzed and cry.